Hey, welcome, welcome. It's good to see everyone today. Thank you for being here. And thank you, Lisa Natoli, for being our co-host today for chapter one of Being Myself. We're so excited. Yes, we're so excited to be sharing this book with all of you. And we have over 1,500 people registered for this Being Myself book study. And I'm very grateful that Rupert has invited us to do this for his meditation series. And as we kick this off, we did the kickoff, of course, with Rupert last week. And we had a couple of changes. He moved to February 9th, where Lisa was our co-host, and then we moved Lisa to chapter 1 and Jenny Beal to chapter 8. And thank you for those adjustments. And thank you everyone for being here for this 1 hour that's going to go just like that. And Lisa, thank you for being willing to look at chapter 1 with us this week.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here, and I love the interactive element of a book study. And I've just put myself on gallery view, so I'm just seeing who's here. I'm very grateful to Rupert Spira and his team, and I just wanted to say as we begin, who has the book? Or I should say, do you have the book? So to put in the chat, if you can, if you have it, yes. If you don't have it, no. And I just wanted to start with that because I used to do book studies years ago, and I found out midway through that some people don't buy the book. They just show up to listen. And I just want to say that this is such an important book. Like, this really is the focus is on the words. And I loved last week, Rupert Spira was on live. And for anyone who's ever listened to Rupert, he's very meticulous and clear in his language. He's really always striving to kind of find the exact right word. So he speaks slowly. And last week, when he described the publication of this book and the work and the love and the care that went into it, to really edit exactly down to the essence of the material. And then Rupert was the final edit. He took it all back once the manuscript was done and went through it again. And so if you haven't bought the book, I really encourage you to buy it. I think it's also maybe an Audible or Kindle, or I'm not sure, but there's...
Yeah, it's not Audible yet. It's Kindle right now. Yeah. You're muted. Lisa, you're muted. There you go.
And the other thing I guess with a book study is I just think that this material is so moving into a direct experience.
Can you make sure your mic is muted when you come in, please? Thank you. Go ahead.
I just think the best way to kind of read the book is not to think about what it means or add anything to it. So even though this is a book study, I think it's good just to stay with what Rupert says. Like, it's just this incredible, like, just chapter 1 blows my mind, really. But yeah, it's a life-changing book.
Yeah. Well, so what we want to look at today for this chapter 1, the way we do the book studies, we'll dialogue. The co-host and I will dialogue for the first 30 minutes, and then we'll take questions after 30 minutes. And if you have a question, because there's so many of us, put a Q in front of your question. If you have something that's, we don't want to get into a long dialogue because there's so many of us. So just put a Q in front of your question, put it in the chat, and Susan Telford is here as our admin. She'll pick it up off of chat, and we'll invite you to make a comment or ask a question. And we'll just try to keep it brief. and it'll make the time is going to go very fast anyway. And I do want to mention in this, we're not going to look at the introduction. As we noted last week, Rupert did mention that the introduction is not his teaching, although I thought the introduction was really amazing, and I did like the green drywood mention, as you know, that Peter Samsell mentioned in the introduction. But we won't cover the introduction because we'll just look at I want to look at the acknowledgement or the note to the reader is really what I wanted to look at before we get into chapter one, because I felt the second paragraph in the note to the reader was important, and I feel it is coming from Rupert. In that second paragraph, he mentions meditation takes place in the space between the words. And he also has this same paragraph in being aware of being aware. And he says, therefore, these contemplations were originally spoken with long silences between almost every sentence, allowing listeners time to explore the statement in their own experience. And I've been to and many of you have been to several of Rupert's retreats. And so I'm suggesting that we use this note to the reader for ourselves, even when we're reading these contemplations, even when we're reading these sentences, that came from his meditations, allowing the listeners time to explore the statements in their own experience. The meditations in this book have been laid out with numerous breaks between the sentences and sections in order to invite and facilitate a similarly contemplative approach. And so I just want to recommend that we kind of take that in this book study. And Lisa, we're looking at chapter one. What are your highlights on page one of chapter one?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, my highlights. I wrote down several. But the thing that I love on the page one, if we're going page by page, is this whole thing of he says everyone has a sense of being myself, but not everyone says has a sense of being myself clearly. So that's actually, I think, yeah, I can't remember exactly where that particular one is, but it's like it's this whole thing of like we're aware of the thoughts, feelings, emotions, sensations, we're aware, but then there's this idea of I and I am. So just as a screen is colored by the images that appear on it, our knowledge of being myself is qualified or conditioned by thoughts, feelings, sensations, perceptions, activities, and relationships. And then a little bit further down, it says, although, here it is, we all have this sense of being myself, not everyone experiences their self clearly. In most cases, our sense of self is mixed up with the content of experience, thoughts, feelings, sensations, perceptions, activities, and relationships. So I love this idea that the experience that most of us have before knowing the I am is a mixture. Bill, are you there? Your video's off.
Hello?
Oh, there you are.
Hey. Yeah. I'm sorry about that. I had a camera function here that was kind of glitching on me. Yeah, I totally I love that first on that first page that the thing that really jumped out at me is this idea of being myself. You know, the book title says it all. We're all being myself. And what he is describing on in that very first paragraph is that this I am that you just read from that paragraph, if we just give our attention to I am as being myself, Rupert says that it pervades, it encompasses and envelops all experience. So if we start right there, then everything that we're involved in being myself, is that experience.
Yeah.
It's enveloping it
Yeah. And
as our growth.
I loved what he says is the very first sentence in chapter 1, everyone has the sense of being myself.
Yeah.
The sense of being myself is the most ordinary, intimate, and familiar experience. And this is why I love Rupert Spira's work so much and his writing, is because everyone complicates this as if it's like enlightenment or awakening or it's some mystical complex thing. It's not. It's the most ordinary familiar experience. And I just also want to just say what Rick said in the comments, and it's exactly what you just said a few moments ago, Rick, Bill, is that this should be a very slow read. To read in a contemplative manner means to read very slowly, long periods of time, pause between sentences, and even between words. This is how it's grokked. The real message is between the words. And that's exactly what you just said, Bill. And that's just always just for me, like with this material, it's gold. And just to be able to kind of take this all in and to realize the ordinary familiar experience that this actually is. You're on mute. Hey, Bill.
Yeah,
There you are.
that's page one. Is there anything you want to look at on page, anything else on one before we
Nope.
turn to page two?
Nope. That's it on page 1.
Okay. And on page two, what do you see that jumps out at you?
So I love this that says being myself is the ever-present factor in all changing experiences or experience. And at the bottom of page 2, it says there are as such two elements to our normal experience of self: our ever-present unchanging being and the qualities it derives from our constantly changing experience, which seem to condition and limit it. So I love this whole idea that there's the mixture. It's like a mixture of just the I, which is the personality, and the I am, which is our essential true nature, which doesn't have these qualities, but to just recognize that.
Yeah, I actually starred the last two or the last paragraph on that page two. There's the two elements to our normal experience, the self and the body mind. Even the body mind is I am focused on the limited self, or the that when it says that it derives from our constantly changing experience, which seem to condition and limit it. We're still the I am. We're still the original being myself, and focusing our attention on the limited self. Yeah. And so for those of you, I see that we have a few questions coming in. We'll look at the questions at the half hour. And thank you for bringing that up. And Rick West, I have your question that you emailed in, and thank you for that. I thought that was excellent. And if we go to page 3, what do you have on page 3, Lisa?
So page 3, I didn't really go through each page, so just forgive me for, I kind of did my favorite parts of chapter 1, but I like the way that you're taking us through each page.
Well, I just don't want to miss anything.
No, I totally like this way. Um, I love this. I love every sentence. Like it's so wild to me. Like I actually read the book at light speed when I first got it, like 2 months ago in one shot. And it was like Christmas morning, like a little kid, like what? And just read through it. And now I'm going through it so slowly and like taking every sentence and just sitting with it and being with it. And I love this second paragraph that says, divested of the qualities of experience. So thoughts, feelings, sensations, perceptions. He lists all of these activities, relationships. Divested of the qualities of experience, our self has no characteristics and therefore no limitation of its own. It is simply unlimited or infinite being, transparent, empty, silent, and still, sharing none of the agitation of our thoughts and feelings. Our essential self or being is inherently peaceful. And I love what he talks about, just as the space of the room cannot be agitated by any of the people or objects within it, so our being cannot be disturbed by anything that takes place in experience. And then he comes back to, again, he uses this phrase about knowing their self clearly. So it's just like a reinforcement that everyone knows being myself, but not everyone knows their self clearly.
Yeah,
So this
yeah,
is really about knowing yourself clearly, this infinite, eternal, changeless self.
yeah. And I, going back to the note to the reader, as we just take that in, this is a direct experience for all of us. We can take these words and we can just say, oh, mental concept, intellectual idea, or we can drop into it, as he says in the second paragraph, as we can drop into it, contemplate it as the transparent, empty, silent stillness. And that takes just moving our attention to awareness, moving our attention to this transparent, empty, silent stillness of being, of being, of being the self. This is why I love, I mean, I know all of us love the title of this book. We are simply being the self. I am that I am. It's so in plain sight that it's missed, right? It's just totally missed. And share and I agree that I just love that it shares none of the agitation of our thoughts. We are that which is aware of those thoughts, those feelings, those emotions, and our essential self or being is inherently peaceful. This is when as most of you know, when I put my hand on the heart, or you put your hand on the heart, it's almost like a reminder connection of this essential self. And then look at I put asterisk in the very last paragraph. 3 is asterisk. It says, thus peace and happiness are the natural condition of our essential being, and they inform the thoughts
Hmm.
So the thoughts that we think are informed by the peace and happiness
Hmm.
that we are when we rest in the peace, when we rest in awareness, when we rest in the transparent, empty silence of the self.
Hmm.
So we can just, and what I like to do is just, and I know that many of you do this as well, we drink it in. We drink it in. It nourishes our experience of beingness, even by reading these words.
Hmm. Yeah. I love the comments in the chat board right now. Um, so yeah,
What do
so
you see that?
that's
Let's look at that. The some of the comments in the chat board. Uh,
well, everyone's sort of saying the same thing. I feel that every sentence is of value. Nothing can be passed over. I love what Rick said. He said, this path is not about any form of self-help or becoming a better me. On the contrary, it's the destruction of the body, mind, me. Peace and happiness can never be found in external objects, beliefs, etc., only uncovered and revealed.
yes. Yeah.
Rosalind says, for years I misunderstood objective experience. I believed he, I think Rupert, was contrasting this with subjective experience. A big fog lifted when I understood what the objects of experience mean from the non dual. And that was a big one for me too, because it's like I didn't understand that thoughts, feelings, perceptions, relationships, objects, all the things were part of the objects. And so, like, this is a revolutionary teaching in my mind. I'm just so grateful that it's available to all of us. Um, I love on the next page, on page 4, this, I'm a coffee drinker, love coffee. And he talks about just as water has no taste of its own, but assumes the taste of whatever it is mixed with and seems to become, for example, tea or coffee, so our essential self or being has no attributes of its own, but assumes the qualities of experience and seems to become a person, a finite self, or an ego. And this part here, one paragraph down from that, it says we seem to become the feeling. So I feel sadness becomes I am sad. We lose ourselves in experience. We forget ourselves. So it's that mixture where our true essential nature, which is happiness and peace, and has no characteristics of its own, gets mixed in with these thoughts and feelings and experience that arise. And then we forget the water, the pure luminous self, and we think I am the feeling. I feel sadness becomes I am sad. And so to be able to just read these words and see the distinction, to see like, oh wow, just to be able to see, oh, it's just the feeling. I see it. I don't have to become it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't have to lose myself in the experience. I don't have to get rid of it. I don't have to, it's simply a being able to just see what's happening.
Yeah. I really love that metaphor of being the water, pure water, nice and clear, before it's turned into tea or lemonade or coffee or any of those other flavors. And we give our attention as pure as the pure water, and then that flavor, whatever's been added, the coffee or the tea, it's now influenced by our attention being the pure self, the unchanged original essence of being is like the water. He says a little bit further down in that fourth paragraph, we lose ourself in experience, we forget ourself. However, this forgetting never completely eclipses the sense of being myself. It is a partial veiling, for even in the darkest feelings, we still have the experience of being myself. And I mean, we can all connect with that. We can all connect with, even if we do something stupid, we say something we wish we hadn't said, there's something that's on that's aware of that stupid thing that was done before the mind comes in and makes us guilty for it. There's the being myself that's aware of the experience. And that's what he's saying right here. Even in the darkest feelings, we still have the experience of being myself.
Yeah.
Before we judge it, before we
Yeah.
put a judgment and we name it and make ourselves guilty and stupid for it, there's
Yeah.
that tiny little moment of just being aware of it.
Yeah. Yeah, and then what he says in the next page, using this water, coffee, tea analogy, is that our essential self remains. This is on page 5. So our essential self remains in its pristine condition, even when mixed with the content of experience. And this next sentence I love. It says, it is only necessary to stay in touch with one's essential self or being in the midst of all experience. And so, this is, it's so good because now we don't have to try to get rid of any experience. We don't, that's what I did all my years. I labeled everything good or bad. And I was like, I don't want to feel this. I don't want to think that. I shouldn't think that. That's a bad. I tried to have positive thoughts. This is a totally different teaching where everything is just welcomed. Nothing is you're not trying to get rid of anything. It is only necessary to stay in touch with one's essential self or being in the midst of all experience.
It says, it says in the second paragraph on that same page, feeling limited, the separate self or ego is prone to vulnerability and insecurity, and thus it seeks to defend itself.
Mm-hmm.
So as soon as we see that, as soon as we see the experience of a need to defend ourselves, we can spot it right there. And we can pause. We can pause and 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 just see the activity of the bodysuit defending itself, the body mind defending itself. He says in the last paragraph on that page, and feeling incomplete, the separate self or ego is given to a sense of insufficiency, inadequacy, and unsatisfactoriness. And in an attempt to recover its natural condition of wholeness, it seeks fulfillment through the acquisition of objects. This is where we take our attention off of the experience and we try to feed it with something, the objects of substances, activities, states of mind, or relationships, instead of facing it and just being present and still with it and allowing it to be exactly as it is, which will bring the resolution. We join the activity, the object of experience, just like Rupert was saying in the top of page 6.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's one of the things I love about Rupert Spira is his ability to, how do I say, like, he simply states what's obvious, but which is not so obvious when we're living in the world and we think things are happening and we feel all sadness or sorrow or suffering, or he puts words to it, like he puts it in a way where it can be seen. like what you just read, feeling limited, the separate self or ego is prone to vulnerability and insecurity and thus seeks to defend itself. And then, he just carries on. Being vulnerable, the separate self or ego is inclined to feel unconfident, inferior, or unloved. And like you said, in an attempt to reestablish the dignity inherent in our true nature. And it says, he says what we all had been doing unconsciously is the impulse behind most complaining, criticizing, and judgment. And then he says that the two activities of the separated self are resistance and seeking. So, and then the separate self lives in a constant state of lack, a chronic and pervasive sense of insufficiency, punctuated by periods of acute distress. This suffering is the inevitable consequence of the overlooking or forgetting of our true self. Little does the separate self realize that what it truly longs for is not to defend or fulfill the entity it imagines itself to be, but to be divested of its apparent limitations and return to its natural condition. So I love that this is put in a way like this isn't a mystical experience. It's literally available to everyone. It's in language that's so down to earth and practical. It's just, and it's so different than what we're used to. I think that at first maybe some of this can feel like what because we're so used to just being a person. We just think, oh, I'm sometimes happy, sometimes sad. So I think sometimes these words in the beginning, if you're just hearing Rupert Spira or non-duality teachings for the first time, it can be a little like, what? But if you stay with it, like if you really, our true self is always here. It loves these words. It's like, oh, yes, yes, there it is.
Totally. Well, it's time that we start to take questions from the board. And Susan, do you have questions that you would read to us, please, from the board?
Yes, certainly. Jenny asked, what is the origin story, the creation story of experience? Why do we leave ourself? And you put in parentheses, although I know it doesn't really matter. And then Eve followed it up with, that too is my question. The original sin or the original sense of being apart from self and separated, was this the only way that we could have an experience of ourself and express into form?
So I love that question, both questions, but we're going to stick to the content of the Being Myself book. And this is not the place really to answer those kinds of questions unless they're referred to in one of the chapters, if you don't mind.
Okay.
I just want to say one quick thing on that too, because that's a question. I see another question that's similar to it on the chat board. Is that Rupert, he just did a retreat in Garrison, New York in October. Bill was there. And there's a great video that he just put out. This woman lost her ex-boyfriend in a car accident, and she's asking what to do about grieving. And she wants to know why. Why do people die young? And Rupert says, and this is similar to the question, these questions are actually an avoidance technique. So it's like we could talk about it. How did creation begin? Why did we choose to be here? Why are we being separate if our true self is happiness? And why do we? But I love Rupert's answer is that, and it's done with such kindness and gentleness that it's you want to just stay alert to where you go into complexity and just stay with, and like I totally agree with you, Bill, just to stay for this time as a gift to yourself, just to stay with the book. I mean, it's and I'll bet you Rupert probably talks about it. Like Rupert actually does address the question. But yeah.
Okay, I'll go on to the next question, which was from Andrew. What's the best way to understand or feel what being is? What is the essential self? Do we feel it in the mind, body, heart, or spirit?
That's a that's a whole. I feel that question is. Did you put that? Is that in the chat?
That's in the chat, yes.
Okay. So I would say, what is it to feel the self? Is that it's not. It's first. It's if I were to ask you, and this is what Rupert has does in all of his webinars, in all of his retreats, are you aware of this experience right now? Are you aware of this experience? And everyone would be able to answer that question. And the difference between one that knows the self and one that's not sure is that we have conditioned ourselves, these body minds are conditioned to think that that the body mind, the personal self identity, Bill, or you, whoever asked that question, you think that you're assuming the identity of I am, and you feel that I am, the body mind, the personal self, is the awareness. However, if you don't have a history, if you're without the use of memory, if I were to ask you, what is it that is aware of this experience? Awareness doesn't have a name, it doesn't have a gender, it doesn't have an age. And that awareness is the essential self that you're asking how to feel it. Well, before anything is felt, it's just a seeing. It's not even a feeling. It's a seeing as awareness. And that's something that I would say will come, and just stay with us through this book study. And all of a sudden, you'll start to pick up little pieces of the ideas that are presented throughout this book in Being Myself. So be gentle on yourself and just stay open to being shown something completely different than you've ever known before.
I love that response, Bill. Yeah, because our experience as people, as bodies, as humans is feeling and thought. I feel this, I feel sad, I feel this. How does it feel? I feel love, I feel. So our entire experience is about feeling. And then of course the whole self-help movement is we want to feel better. This is totally different. So our self doesn't feel. The feeling is objective experience. The thought is objective experience. And I love what you just said, Bill. Just be gentle on yourself, because this teaching for many people is so the opposite of how we have been living. And so I loved what we had already touched on before, as on page 5. Rather than trying to figure out how it feels, is it in the mind, is it in the heart, is it in the, like you said, it is only necessary to stay in touch with one's essential self or being in the midst of all experience. The eternal, changeless, just like the water doesn't have a taste. But then the feeling will add a taste to it. It'll add, but the self is happiness and peace. It doesn't feel, it doesn't have a body, it doesn't have a gender, it doesn't have a limitation.
Right. So do we have another question, Susan?
Yes, we do. G. Franco said on page 8, it states that enlightenment is simply the revelation of the original nature of ourself or being. This is deceivingly simple. This being said, are there any suggestions that would assist us to make this state stick as our minds are constantly chatting?
I'm gonna answer that the best I can. I would say don't try to make anything happen. Don't try to make anything stick. Be willing to not need anything to change and be aware of the activity of the mind without touching it. Just don't touch it. Just remain and let the body, mind, let your personal self do what it's doing, and become accustomed to watching it like the movie. Just watching it, seeing what it does, and don't touch the activity, and don't try to effort to make something stick, because that's where the personal self wants to come in and be involved in the doing. So just stay resting as the awareness of experience and don't touch it.
Yeah, great response and great question. It's just, that's another one. It's like so many people are like, how do I speed this process up? How do I make it stick? How do I reach enlightenment? Or I had it and then I lost it. And so this is so simple. I love how Rupert describes it. And I love that he added this whole section in here. And it's at the very end of chapter 1 on page 8. There's nothing exotic or mystical about enlightenment. It is simply the recognition of something that was always known, indeed is always known, before it is clouded by experience. No one becomes enlightened. Our being is simply relieved of an imaginary limitation, and as a result, its natural condition of peace and happiness shines. So everything in here is just a reminder of what is now, but the mind it's just it can't possibly be this. My life is a mess. I feel terrible. I feel whatever the mind does in that moment. This can't be enlightenment. I'm so angry. I'm so this. I'm so that. But in the middle of all that experience, that's the mixture. The mixture is there's the self that shines, luminous, transparent, radiant, eternal, changeless. And so enlightenment is simply it's the realization of the self which has always been here. It's always just waiting for our acknowledgement. That's all. And then from there, to me, this work is such freedom, because now I don't have to, I'm not the ruler of the universe. I don't need things to go a particular way. We remain as the self, shining in all experience, even what seemed horrific or whatever it is.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for mentioning Kathy for Rick's question, because I want to read it right now. Rick's always been really great. He's been in the book studies for years. He's so involved in the book study. He's always emailing questions in. This is a question that he sent in. He probably put it on the chat too, but I'll read it. It says, commonly understood definitions or pointers are generally deemed important. I know that definitions can be very context driven and may slightly change within any teaching. Nonetheless, how would you distinguish, if at all, between some of the key words used: reality, absolute, awareness, and consciousness, myself, and I, or I am? So How would you distinguish any of those symbols, those words, reality, absolute, awareness, consciousness, myself, and I, or I am? And Lisa, I'll ask you to answer that for all of us.
Yeah, thank you, Rick. Your comments in the board. Oh my goodness. Every time you post, I'm like, yes, yes, that's it. But yeah, to me, all those words are all the same thing. They're all different words for the same consciousness, God, awareness, absolute being. And I've been watching Rupert for years, and I love, he's expressed it also, is how reality doesn't have words. So here, as if we're beginning to express this message, we have to use the words that the language has. So there's always going to be a limitation in the word, and how, for me, when I'm expressing anything to someone, I kind of let the moment tell me which word to use. So I'm always switching out the words. For me, it's all the same thing. There's just this eternal nature. And Rupert even will say, like, to say our being is a limitation, because there's no our, there's no your, there's no me. So to me, it's they're all expressing, they're just different words for the same thing, I think.
Yep. Yeah, I totally agree. And I want to read something that Kim Renee says, I am is enough. And that's true. I am is a great mantra. It's a great portal to the direct experience of just being. And Catherine, hi, Catherine. It's good to see you again. Catherine McGinnis has been here in the book study for years. Consciousness is approached as the silent knowing of detached illumination. It is utterly detached from the noisy perceptions, thoughts, and feelings that distract the mind's attention as they come and go. It is detached from them, though they cannot exist even for a moment when detached from it. Each one of them completely disappears the very moment that it parts with illuminating consciousness. That's why they appear and disappear, while consciousness remains as their one reality. Beautifully said, Catherine. Thank you for that. Awesome. Beautiful.
That was beautiful.
Yeah.
I also see another question from Nani. It says, what are suggested ways or cues to keep connected to the essential self? You mentioned touching our hearts, looking for reminders, perhaps noticing within our experience the veil we're behind. That's such a good question. And I think the book, I'm always going to point to the book, like there's so many just different things in here, that, it is only necessary to stay in touch with one's essential self. And so to me, like, I like what Arthur said too, is to observe without opinion, I think you said. Yeah. And that's one way, but to me, like this, the way I've done it is just to stay and just to see all the thoughts that arise, the feelings that arise, whatever's coming. And one of the things that's been helpful to me is to stop calling them my. So it's just like, that was a big one, is just to realize that this mixture is like these thoughts arising, things that are arising. And I like what you did earlier, Bill, with the whole, are you aware of this experience? And so we can all realize, like, oh, I am aware of this thought. they shouldn't be doing that. I wish I had done this. Why is this happening? And so I always thought that was my thought. But to just stay as the awareness that sees the thought arising and sees the feeling, I feel scared, I am scared. And so that to me is like has been very helpful. Yeah. I think once you start to see all the activity of the separated self, it's just a matter of time before you're on to its games. And even that, it's games. It's not an it.
Yeah, it's something that's sort of it's just what Rupert mentions in the very beginning of this chapter, when your attention is on these ideas, when you really have a pull to have understanding, the desire to know the self, it begins to pervade and reveal. That's these experiences. That's why you're here. That's why you registered, and you become curious. There's this pull to know the self that reveals itself. And before we run out of time, I want to make sure that we touch on the very last page of this chapter, which is page 9, because I just really think that that this is an important statement. No one becomes enlightened. Our being is simply relieved of an imaginary limitation, and as a result, its natural condition of peace and happiness shines. So we don't become enlightened. That's an idea, yes. Is that person awake? I don't know. Are you awake? I don't know. Well, what happens is the shining comes forth. Our being is simply relieved of the imaginary limitation, and as a result, its natural condition of peace and happiness shines. And it happens. It seems to me, at least this is my experience, and what I've seen in most beings, hundreds of you that I know now that are I would call awake. You're having a direct experience of being myself. And it comes in glimpses. You've heard that word used by many teachers, including Rupert. And enlightenment, even the Course in Miracles, and I promise not to use the Course very much, but this one sentence is in the Course says, enlightenment is not a change, it's but a recognition of what you are always. And so enlightenment isn't really anything except the understanding of these ideas,
Yeah.
and being myself.
Yeah. And I love what Kim Renee says on the board. It says the so-called separate self is only a structure loosely held together by patterns of thoughts, feelings, assumptions, etc. And the one thing I just wanted to get in also before the time ends, which I absolutely loved in chapter 1, was this whole list of all the different practices that many people devote themselves to in the search for peace and happiness. It starts on page 6 and goes on to page 7. As the loss of peace and happiness initiates a great search in the realm of objective experience, which is destined sooner or later to fail. I love that. Indeed, none of us would be reading this book if the search had not, to a greater or lesser extent, failed. I got a big smiley next to that one. Once we have become sufficiently delusioned with the capacity of objective experience, so thoughts, feelings, perceptions, relationships, whatever it was we were looking for to reach peace and happiness, once we have become sufficiently delusioned with the capacity of objective experience to provide the peace and happiness for which we long, many of us turn to religious or spiritual traditions which seem to offer a promise of fulfillment. To this end, we might devote ourselves to meditation practices, prayer, yoga, visualization, special diets, disciplined regimens, and spiritual teachers. And these may, to some extent, relieve the pain of our longing and restore a degree of balance and harmony to our lives. However, if our peace and happiness are dependent upon objective experience in any way, however refined or noble, we can, I love this so much. This sentence is crazy good. We can be sure that underneath a veneer of peace, the sense of lack is smoldering. Sooner or later, we must have the clarity and courage to return from the adventure of experience and come back to ourself.
Mm.
So that's it's all in here. It's like, it's incredible to me that this work is available to us, that we can really see, like, oh, the search for peace and happiness never failed. It worked a little bit for a moment and then I lost it again. So to realize, oh, maybe there's something else available to me. And now we're discovering that there is.
And I really love that you didn't that we didn't miss that the clarity of what was just said on those pages, Lisa, because essentially it's saying don't get stuck with the pointer, don't get stuck making an idol of the teacher, don't get stuck in mantras or trying to have a state of mind. And in fact, someone said in the chat right at the very beginning that I think it was Rick, that meditation, and this came from Rupert, meditation isn't something that you do. Meditation is what you are. In fact, I've heard Rupert say prayer is what you are. And so we don't want to get stuck on saying, on the words that are the pointers. We want the direct experience to reveal itself through the words.
Yeah, I just want to also read this comment that just came in from G. Franco, and this is important. And it's funny because, we're in a book study, so, we kind of have to do something in the hour, but I totally agree with this statement. I think it would help if we did not insist on analyzing the written word so much. This is clearly based on personal experience. Until you have gotten a glimpse of it, you will not have a sense of what your direction is. It will speak to you through nature, surroundings, and people. So thank you for that. And that's, we're at the end of our time here, but I feel that the best thing really is, just as this book study, this isn't about these weekly meetings. Like, to me, the weekly meetings are sort of frosting on a cake. To me, the whole experience is to get the book and really just take it in slowly, like really allow yourself to have your own experience and not analyze. Just that's what's been helpful to me, is not for me to add anything to it. And again, it's kind of a funny thing because we're in a book study where
Well, and we all have our own ideas, symbols for the way we use these tools, these pointers. And so everyone's going to use words that are a little bit different, depending on your background, your tradition that you came here with.
And you have different guests for every week. So you have Rupert's coming on a couple more, one or two more times.
Rupert comes on. He'll be here February 9th. He took your place. And I just want to mention that Yoon in the chat has a question that says, I noticed the book does not use self versus capital S self versus small self. Can you comment on that? And I would say, the book isn't really a book. If you remember how it's written, it's laid out as it's gleaning Rupert's meditations, mostly his morning meditations from his retreats. So and if you have been in his retreats, you'll notice, I mean, he doesn't have a plan. He often closes his eyes as a beginning, and then all of a sudden, while your eyes are closed in a retreat environment, you're in session, and all of a sudden he'll just start speaking, and you're listening to these meditations. That's where these words and the book came from, are
Yeah.
these morning meditations on retreat.
And Rupert does, he doesn't, he, I don't think I've ever heard him say self, little self versus capital self. But what he does very often use the distinction. Like he'll say the separated self, the ego, or
The apparent separated self.
so he'll use language that's to make the distinction. It's kind of all he does really is make the distinction between objective reality and the, so-called little self, which people call it the smallest self, versus the self, which is all those other words: consciousness, awareness, the absolute, being, eternal, changeless. So thank you, Bill, for having me on. This is
You're
awesome
welcome.
that you're doing this. Thank you, everyone, for being here.
Yes, yes. Thank you, everyone. We're at the end of our time together now. It's a minute after 1, and thank you for joining us for Being Myself book study. Next week, we're going to have Melissa Goodnight as our co-host, and she's awesome. She's joining us from the West Coast, and you will love her commentaries as well. And thank you all for being here. We'll see you next week. And this replay will be available for you and an email sent out with a link within the next 3 hours. So we'll see you next week, and thank you for being here. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Have an awesome
Thanks, everybody.